The air in Willowcrest's grand ballroom shimmered with the clink of champagne flutes and the murmur of Savannah's elite. I stood at the center of it all, Amelia Harper, 36 years old, my heart pounding not from nerves but from pride. Tonight marked the 10th anniversary of Harper Heritage, my historic preservation firm, and the colonial mansion I called home glowed under the weight of its own history. Willowcrest, with its 200-year-old oak beams, hidden passages, and sprawling magnolia grove, was more than a house. It was my legacy, my grandmother Margaret's gift to me. The gala was meant to be a triumph, a celebration of everything I'd built. But as I raised my glass to toast, a cryptic note slipped from my speech cards. The crest hides the truth. Before I could process the words, the chandelier above me groaned, then plummeted, a cascade of crystal and iron crashing inches from where I stood. The room froze, gasps echoing off the hand-carved moldings, and in that moment I knew this wasn't an accident. I can still feel the tremor in my hands as I brushed glass dust from my dress, my eyes scanning the crowd, faces blurred, clients, colleagues, city council members, but one stood out. My brother Nathan, his smirk sharp as a blade, standing too close to the shadows with his partner Claire. My family was here, all of them, and something about their presence felt like a storm gathering on the horizon. Charles, my father, with his polished real estate tycoon veneer, despite the $500,000 0 cent in insider trading debt strangling him. Victoria, my mother, her smile tight as she hid her prescription drug addiction behind a flute of champagne she shouldn't be drinking. Nathan and Claire, who'd turned the guest cottage into their personal squat after their tech startup imploded in a fraud scandal, and Sophie, my younger sister, her museum curator dreams, buried under $120,000, 0 cents in gambling debts from underground poker dens. They were all here, watching me, and the weight of their gazes felt like a noose tightening. I steadied myself, forcing a laugh to calm the guests. Well, that's one way to make an entrance, I said, my voice carrying the southern charm I'd perfected for moments like this. But inside, my mind raced. The chandelier, a 19th century masterpiece Margaret had restored herself, didn't just fall. Someone had tampered with it, and Nathan's smug grin was the first clue. I excused myself, weaving through the crowd, my heels clicking on the polished hard pine floors. The note burned in my pocket. The crest hides the truth. What crest? Willow crest? The family crest? Etched into the library fireplace? And who had slipped it into my notes? I needed answers, but the gala demanded my attention. Clients with million-dollar contracts were watching, and I couldn't afford to let them see me unravel. The ballroom was a vision, every detail a testament to my work. The walls, draped in restored silk wallpaper, glowed under candlelight. The windows, framed by stained glass Margaret had saved from a demolished chapel, cast jewel-toned patterns across the room. I'd spent years preserving this place, pouring my soul into its hidden passages and secret compartments, the kind of quirks that made Willowcrest a living relic. Margaret had raised me here, teaching me to see history not as dust, but as stories carved into wood and stone. She'd been my anchor when Charles was chasing his next big deal and Victoria was lost in her socialite haze. When Margaret died 6 years ago at 90, her will had shocked everyone. Willowcrest, worth $3,500,000, 0 cents in today's market, was mine alone. Amelia understands its soul, she'd written. My family's reaction had been ice cold, their resentment a silent promise of trouble I'd ignored for too long. I caught Sophie's eye across the room. She looked pale, her fingers twisting the hem of her dress, a nervous habit from childhood. She'd always been the least vicious of them, but her gambling debts had made her desperate. I'd bailed her out twice, wiring money to keep her out of the kind of trouble that doesn't just knock on your door, but kicks it down. Yet here she was, avoiding my gaze, standing too close to Charles, who was schmoozing a city councilman like he wasn't drowning in debt. I wanted to believe they were here to celebrate, but the chandelier's crash and that note told a different story. The gala hummed on, but my focus splintered. I slipped into the hallway, needing a moment to breathe. The air was cooler here, scented with old wood and the faint tang of magnolia blossoms drifting through an open window. I pulled the note from my pocket, its jagged script unsettling. Was it a warning? A threat? My fingers traced the words as I replayed the chandelier's fall. The chain had been cut, I was sure of it. I had seen the frayed metal glinting in the wreckage. Nathan's hired thug, some lowlife he'd probably met through his failed startup, was my first suspect. But why now? Why tonight? I didn't have time to dwell. Evelyn, my neighbor and a retired historian with a knack for noticing what others missed, appeared at my side. Her silver hair was pulled into a bun, her eyes sharp despite her 70 years. "Amelia, you're pale as a ghost," she said, her drawl soft but firm. "That chandelier wasn't an accident, was it?" I hesitated, then shook my head. Evelyn had been Margaret's confidant, her garden chats with my grandmother a ritual I'd envied as a child. She'd warned me last week about a stranger photographing Willowcrest property lines, muttering about zoning changes. "Your family's up to something," she said now, her voice low. "I saw Nathan with a man in a suit yesterday, out by the stables. They were talking about clearing the way." My stomach twisted. The stables, tucked behind the magnolia grove, were where Nathan and Claire had been holding their late-night meetings. I'd caught them there last month, their voices hushed, scattering like roaches when I approached. They'd claimed they were planning a surprise for the gala, but Nathan's smirk had been too sharp, Claire's excuses too rehearsed. I thanked Evelyn and promised to look into it, but as I returned to the ballroom, the weight of her words settled like lead. My family wasn't just resentful, they were plotting. The gala's rhythm pulled me back in. I smiled, shook hands, and pitched my firm's latest project, a contract to restore Charleston State House, a career-defining win. But every laugh felt forced, every glance at my family a reminder of the note in my pocket. Charles was too loud, his charm a performance for the councilman. Victoria's hand trembled as she sipped her champagne, her eyes darting to the exits. Nathan and Claire whispered in a corner, their heads bent over a phone. And Sophie, poor Sophie, looked like she might bolt at any moment. I wanted to confront them, to demand answers, but the gala was a tightrope, and one wrong step could cost me everything. Then it happened. As the clock struck 10, Charles clapped his hands, drawing the room's attention. "A toast!" he bellowed, his voice carrying the false warmth of a man who'd sold lies for decades. "To Amelia for 10 years of Harper heritage, and for a special family gift." My heart stopped. Victoria stepped forward, her smile ablaze, and handed me an envelope. The crowd applauded, oblivious to the dread pooling in my chest. I opened it, expecting a sentimental card or a token gesture. Instead, I found a legal document, its words cold and precise. An eviction notice, demanding I vacate Willowcrest within 30 days. The room spun. Guests clapped, thinking it was part of the show, but my family's faces told the truth. Charles's eyes glinted with triumph. Victoria's lips curled in a practiced smile. Nathan's smirk was gone, replaced by a predator's focus. Claire's hand gripped his arm, her nails digging in. Only Sophie looked away, her face pale, her hands shaking. The notice cited a forgotten clause in Margaret's will, claiming the family held collective ownership due to my failure to file preservation reports. It was a lie. I'd filed every report through my firm's email, a detail they couldn't access, but the audacity of it, the betrayal, hit like a physical blow. I forced my voice to stay steady. "What is this?" I asked, loud enough for the nearest guest to turn. Charles cleared his throat, his tone patronizing. "We've been patient, Amelia, but the family needs this asset now. Willowcrest is worth $3,500,000, 0 cents. Split 5 ways, it solves everyone's problems." Victoria chimed in, her voice dripping with false concern. Margaret would have wanted to help us all. not just you. Nathan leaned forward, his voice low but cutting. We've got a developer ready to buy, Magnolia Holdings. They'll turn this place into a resort and we all get a share. Claire nodded, her eyes cold. You've had 6 years, Amelia. That's more than fair. Card began to murmur, sensing the shift. I felt exposed, raw, but something else stirred, anger, sharp and clarifying. They thought they could humiliate me in my own home in front of my clients, and I'd fold. They were wrong. I folded, the notice, my hand steady now. This is my home, I said, my voice carrying. And Margaret's will was clear. There's no legal basis for this. Charles's smile faltered. Actually, there is, he said, smug. Our lawyer found you missed 3 years of preservation filings. That voids the inheritance. It was a lie, but a clever one. They'd planned this, counting on the public setting to pressure me. I glanced at Sophie, hoping for an ally, but she stared at the floor, tears glinting in her eyes. The note in my pocket felt heavier. The crest hides the truth. Was this what it meant? A truth about the will, the house, or something deeper? I needed time, but the gallows was a battlefield, and my family had just fired the first shot. I excused myself, citing a need to review the document, and slipped into the study, my sanctuary. The room smelled of old books and Margaret's lavender sachets, a reminder of the woman who taught me to fight for what mattered. I pulled out my phone and texted Olivia Bennett, my lawyer. They did it! Eviction notice, Plan C. Olivia had warned me months ago, after I caught that surveyor trespassing, that my family might try something desperate. She'd been Margaret's lawyer, drafting the will that left Willowcrest to me, and she'd seen families fracture over less. Document everything, she'd said, and don't let them see you sweat. I opened the study's safe, where I'd stashed evidence I'd been gathering for weeks, security footage, text messages, and Margaret's diary, found behind a library panel. The diary was a bombshell, detailing Charles's embezzlement from family trusts, Victoria's manipulations, and their attempts to pressure Margaret for money. Only Amelia sees the soul of Willowcrest, she'd written. The others see dollar signs. I'd also found a burner phone in Claire's purse. Its texts chilling. Claire the title. She can't know. And then there was Evelyn's tip about the stranger at the property line, tied to Magnolia Holdings, a developer with rumored mob connections. The study door creaked and I spun, heart racing. It was Evelyn, her face grim. Amelia, I just overheard Nathan on the phone outside. He's talking to someone about finishing the job tonight. My blood ran cold. The chandelier wasn't the end. It was the beginning. I thanked her and locked the door, my mind racing. I had evidence, a plan, and Olivia on speed dial, but the gala was still in full swing, and my family was circling like vultures. The note, the chandelier, the eviction notice. It was all connected, and I was running out of time to figure out how. I returned to the ballroom, my face a mask of calm. The guests were oblivious, dancing to a string quartet, but my family's eyes followed me, predatory and expectant. I caught Nathan slipping out to the terrace, his phone pressed to his ear. Sophie lingered by the buffet, her hands shaking as she poured wine she didn't drink. Charles and Victoria were working the room, their charm a grotesque contrast to the knife they'd just plunged into my back. I needed to stall to keep them off balance until Olivia arrived with the legal counterstrike we'd prepared. But as I moved toward the microphone to address the crowd, a scream cut through the music. Guests scattered, pointing to the terrace where flames licked the wooden railing. A fire, deliberate and spreading fast. Panic surged, but I forced myself to act. Everyone out, I shouted, directing guests to the exits. The fire was small but strategic, blocking the terrace doors where Nathan had been moments ago. Was this his finishing the job? I grabbed a fire extinguisher, dousing the flames, my dress soaked and my lungs burning. The crowd spilled into the garden, safe but shaken, and I saw Nathan reappear, his face pale, Claire clutching his arm. They hadn't expected me to react so fast. But as the fire died, I saw something worse. A glint of metal in the shadows, a figure moving toward the guest cottage. Someone was still out there, and they weren't done. The night was unraveling, and Willow Crest, my sanctuary, was now a battleground. The note in my pocket, the diary in the safe, the flames on the terrace, they were pieces of a puzzle I had to solve before my family took everything. I didn't know what the crest hid, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going down without a fight. Margaret had trusted me to protect this house, and I'd burn it to the ground myself before I let them win. The acrid smell of smoke lingered in my hair as I stood in the garden, watching the last of the gala guests vanish into the savannah night. Willow Crest's grand silhouette loomed behind me, its stained glass windows glinting like wary eyes. The terrace fire had been contained, but the memory of flames licking the wooden railing and the glint of a stranger's weapon in the shadows clawed at my nerves. My phone buzzed in my hand, Olivia's reply to my text glowing on the screen. On my way. Stay sharp. Plan C is locked. I shoved the phone into my pocket, the cryptic note from earlier. The crest hides the truth, burning a hole in my mind. The eviction notice my family had thrust upon me during the gala was a declaration of war, and the fire was their opening salvo. But they didn't know I'd been preparing for this, gathering evidence like a general before battle. As the first rumble of a storm rolled over the horizon, I felt it in my bones. Tonight, Willowcrest would either break me or forge me anew. The air grew heavy, thick with the promise of rain as I re entered the mansion. The ballroom was a ghost of its earlier splendor, overturned chairs and shattered glass from the chandelier's crash littering the floor. My family was still here, scattered like vipers waiting to strike. Charles, my father, stood by the fireplace, his face a mask of false concern as he spoke to a lingering councilman. Victoria, my mother, perched on a velvet settee, her trembling hands betraying the pills she thought no one knew about. Nathan and Claire hovered near the bar, their whispers sharp and urgent, while Sophie lingered by the grand staircase, her eyes red-rimmed and distant. They thought they'd cornered me with their forged eviction notice, claiming I'd failed to file preservation reports to maintain Willow Crest's historical status. They were wrong. I'd filed every document through Harper Heritage's secure server, a detail they couldn't touch. But their audacity, their betrayal in front of my clients, my city, lit a fire in me hotter than the one I'd just extinguished. I needed to stall until Olivia arrived with our counterstrike, a dossier of legal notices that would turn their scheme to ash. But the mansion felt like a labyrinth closing in, every creak of the floorboards a warning. Evelyn's words echoed, Nathan's talking about finishing the job. The chandelier, the fire, the eviction notice, how far were they willing to go? I slipped into the hallway, my heels silent on the runner, and headed for the study. It was my fortress, where Margaret's diary and my evidence waited in the safe. But as I reached the door, a flicker of movement in the mirror caught my eye, a shadow darting down the corridor toward the cellar stairs. My heart thudded. The stranger from the shadows, the one with the glinting metal, was still here. I hesitated, then grabbed a brass candlestick from a side table, its weight cold and reassuring in my hand. The cellar was a maze of stone walls and forgotten relics, a place I'd explored as a child with Margaret, chasing stories of smugglers' tunnels. If someone was down there, they weren't sightseeing. I descended the spiral staircase, the air growing damp and musty, the storm's distant thunder vibrating through the walls. The cellar door was ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning. I pushed it open, the hinges groaning, and stepped inside. The single bulb flickered, casting jagged shadows across crates and cobwebbed shelves. Then, with a deafening clang, the door slammed shut behind me. Panic surged, but I forced it down, gripping the candlestick tighter. The lock clicked, a deliberate sound, and the bulb died, plunging me into blackness. The air shifted, heavy with intent, and I knew this was a trap. My family, or their hired muscle, had lured me here. I fumbled for my phone, its weak light revealing the door's rusted bolt, now jammed with a metal rod. I pounded on it, my shouts swallowed by the stone, but no one came. Then the ground trembled, a low groan echoing from the walls. The storm above was no ordinary squall, it was a beast, and Willowcrest's ancient foundation was straining under its weight. Dust rained from the ceiling, and a sickening crack split the air as a beam buckled. I stumbled back, my phone's light catching a pile of crates collapsing in the corner. The cellar was caving in, and I was locked inside. My breath hitched, memories of Margaret's stories flashing through my mind. Tales of a hidden grate leading to the riverbank, a relic of the mansion's smuggling days. I scrambled toward the far wall, shoving aside moldy trunks, my hands scraping against rough stone. The air grew thinner, dust choking my lungs as another beam splintered above. Time was running out. My fingers found a seam, then a rusted grate, its bars brittle with age. I wedged the candlestick into the gap, prying with all my strength, my arms burning. The grate gave way with a screech, revealing a narrow tunnel just wide enough to crawl through. I dove in, the earth pressing against my shoulders, the storm's roar muffled but relentless. Claustrophobia clawed at me, but I pushed forward, dirt smearing my gala dress until I emerged on the riverbank, rain lashing my face. I gasped, collapsing in the mud, the candlestick still clutched in my hand. Willowcrest loomed above, its lights flickering through the storm. I'd escaped, but the trap confirmed what I'd feared. My family wasn't just after my home. They wanted me gone permanently. Soaked and shivering, I circled back to the mansion side entrance, my mind racing. The cellar trap was no accident. Someone had rigged the door, timed it with the storm. Nathan's thug, maybe, or worse. Magnolia Holdings, the developer Charles was cozying up to, rumored to have mob ties. I slipped into the kitchen, grabbing a towel to dry my face, and checked my phone. Olivia was 10 minutes out, stuck in traffic from the storm. I couldn't wait. The gala was over, the guests gone, but my family was still inside, plotting their next move. I needed to confront them, to buy time, but first, I had to secure the evidence. The study was untouched, the safe's contents intact, Margaret's diary, security footage, and the burner phone I'd found in Claire's purse. I flipped through the diary, its pages brittle but searing. Margaret had known Charles's greed, documenting his embezzlement from family trusts decades ago. He'll sell his soul for $1, she'd written, and Victoria will help him count the change. She'd seen Nathan's ambition, Sophie's weakness, and warned me to guard Willowcrest with my life, but the last entry chilled me. The Guardian watches, but the vault holds the key. Guardian? Vault? The note from the gala? The crest hides the truth? Flashed in my mind. Was there a literal vault, hidden in the mansion, that my family was after? A creak outside the door snapped me back. I locked the safe, grabbed the candlestick, and hid behind the curtains. The door opened, and Sophie slipped in, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Amelia?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Are you here?" I stepped out, candlestick raised, and she flinched. "What do you want, Sophie?" I demanded, my voice low. She looked like a cornered animal, her eyes darting to the safe. "I didn't know," she stammered. "About the cellar, the fire. I swear, I didn't know they'd go that far." Her words were a plea, but I didn't trust them. She'd pawned Margaret's emerald brooch, her betrayal as real as the rest. "Then why are you here?" I asked, stepping closer. She swallowed, tears spilling. "They're meeting with the developer's lawyer now in the library. They're saying you're unstable, that Margaret was senile when she wrote the will." Rage flared, but I kept my voice steady. "Get out, Sophie. You chose your side." She hesitated, then dropped something on the desk. A locket, its silver surface stained with dried blood, engraved with Margaret's initials. "I found this in the chapel," she whispered. "I don't know what it means, but be careful." She fled before I could respond, leaving the locket glinting under the lamplight. My hands shook as I picked it up, its weight heavy with question. Blood? In the chapel? Was this another warning, or a clue to the crest and its truth? I tucked the locket into my pocket and headed for the library, the storm's howl masking my steps. The library was Willowcrest's heart, its shelves lined with Margaret's rare books, including a first edition Poe she'd cherished. The door was ajar, voices spilling out, Charles's booming arrogance, Victoria's sharp retorts, Nathan's clipped urgency. I peered through the gap, my breath catching. A stranger sat at the head of the table, his suit crisp, his eyes cold. Magnolia Holdings' lawyer, no doubt. The codicil is filed, he said, sliding a document across the table. It's dated post-stroke, signed by Margaret. Shared ownership is ours to claim. Charles grinned, a predator scenting blood. And the preservation filings, he asked. The lawyer smirked. Missing, as planned, Amelia's inheritance is void. My knees buckled, but I steadied myself against the wall. The codicil was a forgery. Olivia had found it weeks ago, its signature a clumsy fake. But they'd moved faster than we'd expected, bribing clerks, planting lies. I needed to act, but the library's chandelier flickered and a shadow moved behind the shelves. Another thug? My heart raced as I backed away, only to freeze at a sharp pain in my neck. A dart, its sting spreading like fire. I stumbled, the candlestick clattering to the floor, and a masked figure loomed, his voice a hiss. Sign the deed or you're done. The world blurred, but the mansion's security system, my one smart upgrade, screamed to life, its alarms piercing the haze. The intruder cursed and fled, leaving me gasping on the floor. I clawed my way to my feet, the drug's effect fading, but leaving my limbs heavy. The alarms had saved me, but the library was empty now, my family and their lawyer scattered. I staggered to the study, locking the door, and collapsed at the desk. The locket, the note, the codicil. It was all connected, and I was running out of time to unravel it. My phone buzzed. Olivia, finally here, pulling into the drive. I grabbed the dossier from the safe, its pages heavy with truth, tax records proving I'd maintained Willowcrest, receipts for every restoration, and footage of Nathan bribing a clerk. But the locket haunted me, its blood a silent scream. Was it Margaret's? Someone else's? And what was the guardian she'd written about? Olivia bursts in, her face grim, a briefcase in hand. They're escalating, she said, spreading documents on the desk. Charles is tied to Magnolia Holdings through a shell company. They're not just developers, they're fronting for a syndicate. And Victoria's mortgages? 80 grand? Forged in your name? I nodded, my throat tight. They tried to kill me tonight, I said, recounting the cellar, the dart. Olivia's eyes darkened. Then we hit back now, plan C, full exposure. She handed me tailored notices for each family member. A cease and desist for Charles's collusion, fraud charges for Victoria's mortgages, theft charges for Sophie's pawning, and investor fraud for Nathan and Claire. The storm raged outside as we returned to the ballroom, where my family had regrouped, their faces a mix of defiance and unease. Charles stood first, his voice booming. Amelia, enough drama. Sign the deed, and we'll make this easy. I held up the dossier, my voice cold. You thought you could forge a codicil, bribe a judge, and bury me in that cellar? Gasps rippled through the room. Security guards summoned by Olivia had slipped in, their presence a silent threat. I handed Charles his notice, his face reddening as he read it. You're done, I said. Victoria's hands shook as she opened hers, the mortgage evidence undeniable. Nathan crumpled his, snarling, but Claire's eyes widened, her bravado cracking. Sophie took hers silently, tears streaming. I played the video, Charles's voice damning. Pay the judge whatever it takes. The will's ours. The room fell silent, the guards stepping closer. Olivia spoke, her voice steel. These notices are a courtesy. Comply or face prosecution. Charles roared, threatening lawsuits, but his bluster faltered under the guards' stares. Victoria pleaded, her voice cracking, while Nathan blamed Claire, their alliance fracturing. Sophie whispered, I'm sorry, but I couldn't look at her, not yet. Then it came, the final blow. Nathan's investors, tipped off by the chaos, stormed in, their leader a furious tech mogul. Harper, you're covering Nathan's debts, he bellowed, believing I was complicit. The room erupted, guests whispering, my reputation teetering. I faced him, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. Nathan lied to you, not me. Check the notices, his frauds laid bare. Olivia backed me, handing the mogul a copy, and he backed off, glaring at Nathan, who shrank under the weight of his own lies. But the night wasn't over. As the family gathered their things, a black SUV roared up the drive, its headlights cutting through the rain. I slipped out, instinct screaming, and sprinted toward the riverbank. The SUV's engine growling behind me. The storm swallowed my footsteps as I veered into the woods. Branches skidded its doors, slamming. And I dove into an abandoned mill, its rusted walls my only shield. Footsteps crunched outside, then faded, the storm masking my escape. I waited, heart pounding, until silence returned, then stumbled back to Willow Crest, soaked and alive. Dawn broke, gray and heavy, as the family left, security ensuring no heirlooms vanished. Sophie lingered, her apology raw but unanswered. I locked the gates, the mansion mine again, but the locket, the vault, and the guardian gnawed at me. Later, as I cleaned the study, I found a coded map in Margaret's desk, its lines pointing to an underground vault beneath the chapel. My pulse quickened. The blood-stained locket, the note, the diary, they were keys to a truth Willowcrest had guarded for centuries. I stood in the garden, the magnolias whispering, and vowed to uncover it, no matter the cost. My family had tried to break me, but they'd forged a warrior instead. Willowcrest was my legacy, and I'd fight to the end to protect it.